we have Kurtis Kemple with Navigating React Native Navigation. Yeah, it's a difficult subject matter, navigating, and he's going to take a deep dive into a couple of libraries, providing a solution for it.
All right, can you hear me? Is this good? Is this working? All right, awesome. Everybody's still with me? I know it's getting kind of late in the day. There's been a lot going on, but we're going to talk about some interesting stuff. Navigation. Definitely a tumultuous topic in React Native. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of it. Before we start, though, take a second to talk about myself. I'm a tech lead at Major League Soccer, focusing on our UIs. So that's everything from like chatbots to websites, mobile, anything that falls under interacting with end users. Oh yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Medium, GitHub, all the usual places. And before we actually talk about navigation, I just want to give a little backstory, just a little background to kind of lead up to where we got to with navigation, some of the issues we ran into, and why we really wanted to buckle down and figure out what solution would work best for us. So in 2017, we really wanted to rethink our UI strategy. Major League Soccer started internalizing our technology relatively recently. And if you look at our UIs or you go to some of our experiences, they can feel a bit disparate, right? It doesn't necessarily have that cohesive feel that you want, right? And we really wanted to focus on bringing more consistency to our fans. We want, if you go from your phone to the website to Facebook Messenger, you see things that are similar, that feel the same. And we really wanted to try and achieve this while reducing duplication, right? We want to eliminate writing code that we don't have to, and we wanted to see if we could do this and decrease the number of teams. We were looking to internalize our mobile app project, and we had a decision to make. We could try React Native and see if we could get that to work, or it was going to be bringing on an Android and iOS team. So it was a lot of stakes on the table. And at MLS, we love React. So we've already seen success with it in a few places. Some of our more real-time UIs like Match Center is running on React. Our Fire TV app is actually a React app as well. And we really loved it. So we said, why not try it on mobile, right? Let's bring React everywhere we can. Let's try and get consistency not only in our coding style, but to have that kind of show through the UIs. And when you're dealing with a prototype, we had a tough test, right? So when you're dealing with React Native, a lot of people have a lot of concerns, right? Well, can I do everything that I can do on mobile in a React Native app? And this is a very valid question. So we decided to tackle the toughest features that our current mobile app supported. This is like Google Cast, custom Uyala video player, custom analytics, pretty much everything that we could throw at it. We were able to just like bang through it. We were really impressed with the amount of speed at which we could churn out these services. I think it was like about 6 weeks to implement a list of about 9 key features, things that would be very difficult even in a standard mobile environment. And what we found out was where we thought we would find our biggest hurdles, we actually found our biggest successes. So React Native did a really good job of opening the door to native APIs, right? And bridging is something that's actually pretty easy to do. And we were in love. We were absolutely loving it. Development was going great. Prototype was going great. And then we got to navigation, right? So here we were able to like bang out these features and produce awesome stuff. And like all we wanted to do was just navigate through these features, right? Set up something quick to show, the higher ups so that we could get our buy-in. And it really turned out that navigation is actually a really tough problem, right? So we started looking and we were like, okay, well, internally, Facebook has TabBar, right? iOSTabBar, Navigator, NavigationExperimental, right? So it's like it has the word experimental in it, right? So obviously not fit for production. And really, I mean, Facebook kind of just decided to leave it to the community, right? So they haven't really pursued a navigation solution to fit directly into React Native itself. There's been enough people trying to solve this problem. And the reason why is because tough problems like navigation tend to have many solutions, right? Everybody has different requirements or different ideas about how routing should be handled. It should be embedded in the app. It should sit outside of my business logic. So it gets tough, right? And we found out that there was roughly like 137 solutions, all right? So, now this is like Pandora's box, right? So here we are trying to just build a prototype, right? And we just to show off the features that have nothing to do with navigation, right? So how do we choose? How do we choose one out of 137? Well, our first idea was to gather the Dragon Balls and see if we could wish for the right answer. However, that did not turn out the way we wanted to. So what we ended up doing was we ended up rolling our own. Right? I don't know. Hang on. There's an asterisk there on purpose. Just for the prototype. We just needed to get this prototype into the hands of our stakeholders, and we said, we'll circle back, right? We knew that we were going to have to come back and really evaluate the options, which also meant, looks like we were actually going to have to do some work, right? No one, has really come in, compared all of the solutions, and just really tried to lay out some of the features, what they support, what they don't support. So that was the number one step, right? The very first thing that we had to do was define our needs. What did we need at MLS to have successful navigation solution? Well, because we were trying to bring consistency across all of our UIs, one of the things that we wanted, this was a key one, was cross-platform. Now, if it didn't support cross-platform, it's not a killer, but that's a really nice to have. It had to be flexible. So we needed something that was easy to integrate into the app, as far as maybe connecting it to Redux or MobX, or if we have very intricate routing solutions like dealing with logged in or logged out users, or wanting to send somebody somewhere else, given a dynamic set of requirements. The other thing that it had to have is a great developer experience. At Major League Soccer, we're a really small team. We really try and focus on developer experience and high velocity. And as part of that, it's imperative that the tools that we use and the libraries that we pick and add into our application have as good of a developer experience as what we are coding into our app. Another thing that we were really looking for was strong community. So we really wanted to not have to be the people paving the way. And that's not always easy, especially when you're dealing with something as new as React Native, but we were hoping to at least find some stuff to fall back on. Due to time constraints and being such a small team, it was hard for us to really be able to invest very deeply in onboarding or teaching others how to use this tool. It also had to be stable. So again, we're talking about React Native, right? So everything, the word stable itself is not very stable. But we needed something that we could actually use in production. If there were breaking changes, they weren't happening too frequently. It was something that we could adjust to and adapt to. And lastly, because we really wanted to focus on surfacing more content and interacting with our users better, we really wanted to have really good support for deep linking. Because notifications were going to be a big part of our strategy to reach more people. So we knew that we had these requirements, right? And so we set out to find some solutions that met these requirements, right? And we searched far and wide, and we found quite a few. So, but I'm actually going to focus on 3 for this talk because it's only half an hour. And the 3 that I'm going to be talking about are native navigation, React Navigation, and React Router. So all 3 of these had enough features in them that we could test them and see if they would work for us at MLS. It seemed from the surface, from doing our research, that any one of these could potentially be a good solution. So I started with native navigation. I picked it first because I had just been hearing about it the most recently. I was interested to dig in and see what was going on under the hood. And just taking a closer look at it, you can see that it does look and feel very native. The animations are pretty smooth. It was a decent developer experience in code, and we're going to get more into that now. So we're going to go through the pros and cons of each library. But again, remember, this is in consideration of our requirements. And the most important part is figuring out what your requirements are for a navigation solution, and it'll make it a lot easier to kind of make this decision. So the first thing that we loved about it was, well, it feels very native, right? And that's because it is. The animations were always smooth. No matter how many components we would throw into a view, there was never any jank between, between slides, between screens. It was good. From a codebase standpoint, it's extremely easy to set up. It really only takes a couple of lines of code. So if we look here, you just include the navigator and you register screens. You don't have to register all of them in like some routes file, kind of like what you see here. You can register them pretty much anywhere, but the first one it picks up and registers is what it's going to treat as your home screen. Another thing that we liked about native navigation was that it came with built-ins for both view and tab. We thought that was great at first, right? We thought, okay, cool, so this is less work. We don't have to implement tabs ourselves. So we did like that those were included. Another thing that I loved about, and actually Airbnb, I believe they talked about this at ReactConf, was the idea of shared element transitions. And a pretty common situation that you'll see in mobile apps is like a list view that has images, say movie posters or Airbnb rentals, right? And when you click on one of those, that image will animate to the next view. And that's a really powerful animation. It's a really good user experience. And that's something that you obviously want to be able to capture in React Native. So what it kind of looks like is this. So you have a shared element group, and then you pick what a shared element is. And you define it with like a particular type and an ID. And then whatever's inside of that shared element is what's going to transition to the next screen. And so on the next screen, you have a similar shared element, right, with the same ID and the same type. And then, you'll want the same content in between it, right? But now it's going to take the styles from your screen you're going to and animate from your screen you're coming from to that new view, which is really nice. But it's not very easy to get set up and working yet. And the debugging around this was a bit interesting. Running this in the simulator, I would see like white screens sometimes, but then run it on the phone, and it was actually fine. So it just felt like it's not quite there yet. A huge thing that really had me keeping my eye on this too is custom navigation implementations. And what this means is that they actually expose an interface, and you can add your own navigation solutions in native code. So if you're not happy with the tabs that are being rendered, or you want to change the animation or something between views, you can actually implement your own navigation solution in native code. That's really powerful. So that's definitely something that we liked. And this wasn't big for us, but I want to bring it up here because it's a big deal. It integrates with existing native apps. So if you have a brownfield app and you want to get started with React Native, native navigation might be a good solution. So a couple of the things that were tough about this, the biggest being installation. So because it's native and it's written in Swift, there's a few things. You have to deal with Cocoa pods, right? So you end up in pod files for, it took me like almost a day to get this configured properly. But that's just because there's like a lot of churn right now and it's not super stable. But you're also going to be altering, core iOS and Java files. So if you're trying to stay very surface level and just deal with JavaScript, it's going to be very painful to get set up. But when you're done, you definitely feel like you accomplished something. It was very interesting to get it set up, but once I had it working and understand how all the pieces were fitting together, I actually like the way that that you have to set it up. You lose React Native Link, which is kind of tough. But I like the idea of having React Native in CocoaPods instead of as a manual link. It was cool. But in their own right, they even say themselves, it's not stable yet, right? I mean, it's only on version like 0.1.0. I don't even know if they've released an update since then. It's definitely in beta and not ready for production, right? So we're keeping our eye on it, but we definitely could not use this yet because it's just not ready. It's not there. But we do think that it has a lot of promise. One other thing that we didn't love about it is navigation options. So when you're dealing with the native views, you have to set your config for title color, screen color, background color. It's pretty expansive. There's definitely a lot of options, but if you have very detailed or very like far out designs that really break the standard mold, it's really hard to implement them. It's hard to get those native tab components to look in the way that you want them to. Yeah, so, not quite stable yet, right? And that's touching back on that disclaimer. But for us, it has to go on a con because we're wanting to take this into production soon, and it just doesn't feel like it's ready yet. So the next solution we looked at was React Navigation. This is a community project, right? And it has a lot of steam behind it. Expo, I believe, ships with this as well. And so we said, all right, let's check this out and see what it's got going for it. So here's a little demo of that by itself. And again, looks good, right? Looks almost like the native navigation example. It definitely kind of has that native feel to it. But I feel like when you're watching them next to each other on a phone, you can actually tell the difference between native navigation and React Navigation. A lot of the pros, though, it did have a lot of things going for it. So it was very easy to set up, right? I mean, it's just a JavaScript implementation, which means there's really no heavy lifting. So if you wanted to today just drop it in, I mean, you can do so in about 5 lines of code. So we really enjoyed that part of it. That goes back to the great developer experience. It was definitely quick to set up. Another thing that we liked about it, cross-platform, right? So again, that's just a requirement for us. It might not be for everybody, but that's something that we want to look at. And when I say cross-platform, I don't just mean, native web. Like, we're thinking into the future. We're thinking about VR when it comes out, right? And dealing with other platforms, things that aren't even being dealt with yet. So this handles web and native. View tab and drawer navigation. So it ships with implementations for each one of these. So again, if you need to get going quickly and you don't want to spend a lot of time building this stuff up on your own, you can definitely do that. And it does feel very natural to the environment, right? So when you're on iOS, you have the bottom tab bar. When you're on Android, you have the top material tab bar, which was nice. It was definitely very quick to get going with. An interesting feature that you never really hear about with React Navigation is something called screen tracking. So I was just digging through the docs, and basically what it is you can just add a listener, almost like if you're coming from a web environment like Pop State or something off of history, right? And all it's doing is telling you where you're coming and where you're going. And why that doesn't seem like that much or that great, when you think about like tying in analytics in a non-intrusive way, or you want to do something like prefetch data or something like that, depending on the route, it starts to become really powerful when you start to think about it like that. Another cool feature that, again, I haven't heard much about is it's becoming an HON. It's a new term right there, higher order navigation. And so basically what I mean by that in the TLDR is that they're starting to make it so that you can actually integrate other navigation solutions, but just use the React Navigation API. So if you want native navigation under the hood, but you're already using React Navigation, you can do that, right? So you have that ability. It's coming. It's not there yet, but it was something that I thought was very interesting. So some of the things that we found that we didn't like about it, though, was screen transitions can lag, but only when you are really loading down that view that you're going to. I mean, if you're doing some smarter rendering, and really trying to like limit the amount of work that has to be done to render that initial view, you'll have no problems. But the issue is that you have to do the work, and that kind of hurts developer experience. It's like, much like in web, you have to really like actually do extra work to get performance, right? Because single-threaded. Long titles overlap. So this is just like a total nitpicky thing, right? I was like having a hard time coming up with things to find. But it's weird when you see it though, right? Like there's certain things that you still have to handle like that, and it limits me, right? Like I couldn't do today's forecast and 3-day forecast because then they would overlap. So it's just a little frustrating when you have to actually change your design or implementation because of a limitation on the library. And the other thing was we weren't in love with the way you configure navigation options for it either. It was very similar to native navigation, where you're basically defining properties on an object and passing those through. And while it's not terrible, right, you have to define it some way. The problem that I find, again, comes back to very detailed views. It's really hard to get something that looks very original because you're bound to those native views and the basic styling of a tab bar or a header. And the third thing that we looked at was React Router. So if we take a look at this one here, you can see. So again, it's a JS implementation, but it's doing the job, looks good, everything moves very nicely. It also looked pretty native on a phone. So some of the pros for this one, and this was a pro for all of them, we were really impressed at how easy they were to get set up, like in code. All 3 solutions, and there's others that I didn't even get to talk about, but I'll say of the top 5 that we ran through, and we went through more than that, they all had very easy setup, which just speaks volumes to React and JavaScript and React Native in general. But if we look at the setup here, it's a bit different. It's JSX for sure, but I feel like React Router kind of takes a different way of thinking about routing. And that can actually slow down developer experience at first because it takes some developers a little bit of time to get their heads around it. But once you do, it's extremely flexible and powerful. And it's also cross-platform. So coming back, talking about being able to route anywhere, right? Like VR, hardware. Right now, you can do that with React Router because they have something called a memory router, which is just in memory, right? So if you had hardware, like a wall of LEDs, right? You could actually change how you want that to display, using routing, right? It's pretty impressive. Another thing we liked about it, obviously, declarative API, right? It's just components. So once you do get your head around it, you're using the exact same tool that you're using to build your application, right? And then something that I kind of hinted at a second ago that I love about this library is redirects. It's interesting when you think about that from a client side. I mean, they're used a ton on the server, right? But nobody ever really said before, like, let's make that like a big part of client-side navigation, right? So it is in some, like Backbone does a little bit of work with this. But it's really great. So looking at that same example before, we have 2 routes, and those define actual routes that we want people to go to. But if you fall through those and you hit nothing, then we just redirect you to where we want you to go. And that's the most basic example. You can apply this to authentication, permissioning. The list goes on. So some of the cons. The cons here actually are pretty heavy, but you get a lot with it, so it's very tough. But one of the biggest issues is it's roll your own transitions, right? So both React navigation and native navigation give you transitions. They give you animations without you having to do anything. With React Router, there is none of that, right? You have to implement that yourself, so you have to be willing to take on that overhead. Another thing that it doesn't have that the other 2 have is built-in Android back support. And while you can still do it, right? So we just end up with something like this, just shortened down for brevity's sake. It's kind of annoying that we have to do this. this can get to be very boilerplatey, right? Like very verbose if this is all over your application. You can obviously abstract it and stuff like that, but point being is that you have to worry about it now instead of your navigation library having to worry about it. So when we took all of that information and we put it all together, right, and we compared these services, for us, we found that React Router had the most of the core traits that we were looking for. But if you notice, React Navigation and native navigation also have a lot of awesome features themselves, right? So this is where we get to that point where it becomes important to really focus on what your needs are, because there's going to be a solution that can take care of them. So there's other options of note too, right? Like I said, we didn't have a ton of time to go over these, but there were other ones. And one that I really want to bring a lot of focus to is React Native Navigation by Wix. And it has actually been around longer than native navigation. It is a native implementation. It has a great API as well. A lot of good things going for it as well. So that the whole point of being is don't just look at these three and stop there. I mean, you saw there's like 137 results on NPM. So, make sure you do the work and really try and find out something that fits for you, right? So there is no best navigation option, only the best option given your requirements. I've seen a lot of talk on like Hacker News and Twitter about, which native navigation solution is the best, which one is the right one to use. And that's going to depend. It's just always going to depend on what your actual needs are. The example apps repo, you guys can check it out. All three of those applications are in the same repo, so you can start them up in iOS or Android and mess around with them to check it out, which is really cool. And that is it. That is all I have got. So I'm actually like 3 minutes early. So maybe Q&A.
Awesome. So, hello? Hello? So, we actually have time for questions. That's when the speaker gets done early. You can ask questions. So, anybody? All right.
Yes, I just want to know which implementation you actually choose.
Which one did we pick? I knew that was going to be the question. We actually decided to go with React Router v4 right now. It met of this, if I back this up, boom, right? So it has all of the things that we're concerned about. App integration is actually not a concern of ours, but I felt that it was very important to include here because it's probably a concern for a lot of other people. But React Router met all of our needs. Now, where we're most concerned is around the JavaScript animations. We feel like right now we're seeing really good results, but we're keeping a really close eye on native navigation, like a really close eye.
All right. Any more questions?
Hi. Should be on? Cool. Did you, as you mentioned, Navigator Experimental, did you look into it deeply or did you not manage to get to that?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, Navigator Experimental?
Oh, yes, Navigation
did you
Experimental. Yes, so actually we did look into it, but we found the API to be worse than all of the other ones that we tried out. Also, I've heard that it's being deprecated. Yeah, and it also has the word experimental in it. So that kind of like is a huge red flag, yeah.
Well, I mean, React Native is pretty experimental. I'm also interested to see, well, what things made React Navigation not flexible enough? Because I'm using it on an app now, and I've found it's been flexible enough for what we're doing. I mean, obviously, it's down to what we need and what you need, but just interested to know what your pain points were.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, I think that we could implement any one of these into the application. And we would be fine, right? Like they're all good solutions. But when you have so many good solutions, you have to boil that down and pick one. And again, we are targeting many platforms, and React Navigation does cover web and native, right? But we're looking at AR, VR, like I said, hardware. So we're hoping that that will carry over to those environments as well. And I should say, not from a reuse perspective, right? Like we're not trying to reuse the entire application, but it's nice to be able to have the same coding styles and be using the same tools in different environments, right? It's a better developer experience, higher velocity, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, one last question, and then we get to go get more coffee.
So for any of these, to do what you wanted, did you actually have to, like, if not fork, at least go to the code and mess around with it to make it, fit for what you want to do?
Interesting. Oh, like, did I actually dig into their implementation
Yes,
and try and see under the hood, like?
Not for like your information, but like when we were trying to decide on those, I found that for many of them, we had to go and kind of fix little things here and there, or like enable things, but in their code. So it's not, it wasn't.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so that's what I meant, like stable and very, strong community. That's exactly that. We're hoping that like things, if there's bugs, that they're being fixed, or we're able to fix them and make those contributions ourselves. Yeah, so we definitely took that into account. And we found that really native navigation seems to have the smallest footprint right now as far as outside contributors and really doing that. But when you think about it, it's very, very new. And, it's going to take some time. React Router and React Navigation, they've been around for a while, and they're actually like, pretty much community tools. So I feel, those definitely have that need. But again, native navigation, it's really hard to say it's a con that they don't because it's so new. And, it's going to take some time before it gets adoption and people start, using it more.
All right, thanks, Kurtis.
Thank you.